Today's episode comes to you courtesy of Damien, who's been supporting this channel as a general tier patron. I truly couldn't do this without the support from amazing patrons like Damien, so again, Damien, thank you so much. And for the personalized deck tech, Damien chose a deck built around Kediss and Falthis with a theme of having mostly animals in the deck. Kediss Emberclaw Familiar is a 1/1 elemental lizard for 1 in a red that of course has partners, so yeah, we could have 2 commanders, and it says, whenever a commander you control deals combat damage to an opponent, it deals that much damage to each other opponent. And then Falthis Shadowcat Familiar is a 2/2 Nightmare Cat for 2 in a black that says, commanders you control have Menace and Death Touch. So these two combined are of course, well, animals, and they are low to the ground commanders that benefit each other by helping you hit your opponents harder, or should I say maybe hit your opponents more often with that Menace and Death Touch, and also spread that damage around to the other opponents as well. But of course these are not the only animals in this deck, and speaking of those other cards, every single card in this deck, including these commanders, is less than $1, so of course it's a very budget-friendly deck. And as I'm taking you through this deck, I'm going to be taking you through different tactics to show you how this deck works and how we're going to win with it. On top of that, if you are interested in this deck, make sure you check out the deck list link in the description below. And now with all that said, let's jump into it. First up, there's Wayfarer's Bauble, which we can pay 2 to tap and sacrifice to get a basic land into play tapped. And then we've got Arcane Signet, which can tap for either our colors, and Rakdos Signet, which we can pay 1 and 2 to tap for both of our colors. Moving on, we've got some animals that can help us with ramp as well. Well, in a way with Ebony Fly, it is an artifact that enters the battlefield tapped and again tap for a colorless, but if we pay 4, we essentially turn it into an insect. So yeah, technically an animal, okay? Next up, there's Burnished Heart, which is an elk, and we can pay 3 to sacrifice it to get 2 basics into play tapped. Whereas Goldhound is a treasure dog with First Strike and Menace, and we can tap and sacrifice it for 1 mana of any color, like a treasure. Moving on, we've got Halo Scarab, which has pay 2, exile from our graveyard, create a treasure token. And then both Bronze Walrus and Opaline Unicorn are mana dorks, which can tap for 1 mana of any color, and Bronze Walrus is also going to have a scry 2 when it comes into play. And finally, 2 other animals that can help us out are Simian Spirit Guide and Thermopod. Simian Spirit Guide is an ape spirit that we can exile from our hand for a red, and Thermopod is a slug that lets us sacrifice creatures to add a red to our mana pool. But now that we've talked about animals that help us with mana, let's talk about all the other awesome animals in this deck. Because, of course, in this deck, we've got rats, bats, and yes, even crab, well, ooze horrors with Wave of Rats, Basilica Screecher, and Uchalon. Wave of Rats is a 4/2 a trample, and when it dies, if it deals combat to a player this turn, returns the battlefield under its owner's control. Whereas Basilica Screecher is a 1/2 with flying and extort, so it can help us gain some life and drain our opponents. And then Uchalon's power is equal to the number of crabs, oozes, and or horrors that we control, and it says at the beginning of your end step, exile to 1 target creature card from opponent's graveyard. If you do, create a token that's a copy of Uchalon. So at the end of the day, we can make a lot of copies of this and have a lot of crab, ooze, horrors in play. But of course, we've got even more kinds of animals with snakes, lizards, and insects with Hooded Blightfang, Hissing Iguanar, and Tunneling Geopede. Hooded Blightfang has Death Touch, and it says whenever a creature you control with Death Touch attacks, each opponent loses 1 life, and you gain 1 life. And on top of that, it essentially makes our Death Touch creatures incredibly deadly to planeswalkers by taking them out. And of course, keep in mind, as long as Falthis is in play, our commanders have Death Touch as well. Next up though, we've got Hissing Iguanar, which says whenever the creature dies, we can have Hissing Iguanar ping something for 1. And speaking of pinging, Tunneling Geopede has whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, deals 1 damage to each opponent. And speaking of pinging, we've also got some other animals that can help us out, starting with a boar beast like Whole Hauler Swine, because whenever it's dealt damage, it deals that much damage to each player. And then we've even got some dinosaurs that can help us out too, as Sun Crown Hunters and Frilled Death Spitter. Whenever Sun Crown Hunters is dealt damage, it pings an opponent for 3, and Frilled Death Spitter is going to ping an opponent for 2. Up next, we've got a dog, a scorpion, and an insect with Dreadhound, Serrated Scorpion, and Swarm of Bloodflies. Dreadhound is going to have its mill 3 when it comes into play, and it says whenever a creature dies or a creature card is put into a graveyard from a library, each opponent loses 1 life. And speaking of draining our opponents, Serrated Scorpion says when it dies, it deals 2 damage to each opponent, and you gain 2 life. And with creatures dying, well, we can gain a lot of value out of Swarm of Bloodflies, which says when it enters the battlefield, it comes into play with 2 counters on it. Whenever another creature dies, we get a counter on it. So this flyer can get massive in absolutely no time throughout the game. But of course, we also have some other animals that can help us out in different ways. including a starfish, which is of course very sinister with Sinister Starfish that can tap to have a Surveil 1. Or how about a spider with Doomweaver that has Soul Bond whenever it's paired with another creature each of those creatures has when this creature dies, draw cards equal to its power. And then Thieving Amalgam is an ape snake that's gonna have us manifest the top card of each opponent's library at the beginning of their upkeep, and it says whenever a creature you control but don't own dies, its owner loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. So this can get us even more friends in play that also punish our opponents when they leave play. But next up we've got the Golden Pig of this deck, which is the #1 card out of our 99. And the Golden Pig for this deck is Atali Primal Storm. Atali is a 6/6 Elder Dinosaur that costs 4 red, and it says whenever it attacks, exile the top card of each player's library, then you may cast any number of spells from among those cards without paying their mana cost. So this one creature can give us a ton of value throughout the game, getting us more and more cards off the top of everyone's libraries, including some more lovely animals that we can get not just of our own, but our opponent's animals as well. So due to the insane amount of value this card can provide, it is most definitely the Golden Pig of this deck. But speaking of value, next up, we've also got some other ways to dig deeper into our deck with cards like Tormenting Voice, Throw a Possibility, and Cathartic Reunion. Tormenting Voice and Throw a Possibility are each going to have us discard 1 card to draw 2, and Cathartic Reunion has us discard 2 to draw 3. And then we've got Pirate's Pillage, Big Score, and Unexpected Windfall, each of which make us discard 1 card to draw 2 cards and make 2 treasure tokens. Next up, we've got Sign and Blood, which is going to have us draw 2 and lose 2, Read the Bones, which has us scry 2, draw 2, and lose 2, and Siphon Mine, which makes every other player discard a card, and we draw a card for each card discarded this way. So again, in a multiplayer format like Commander, this can be everyone else discards a card, we draw 3. But now that we've talked about digging down into our cards, how do we throw a wrench into our opponent's plans? Well, we've got some animals that can help us do just that with Gorilla Shaman, Agitator Ant, and Stronghold Rats. Gorilla Shaman has pay XX and 1, destroy target non-creature artifact with mana value X. Whereas Agitator Ant says, at the beginning of your end step, each player may put 2/1 counters on a creature they control. Goad each creature that had counters put on it this way. So this can help us have our opponents start swinging at each other. And speaking of swinging, there's Stronghold Rats, which has Shadow, so it basically just can't be blocked except by creatures with Shadow, and there's probably not going to be any creature with Shadow out there. Regardless, and when it deals combat damage to a player, each player discards a card. Moving on though, we've got Ravenous Chupacabra, which has when it enters the battlefield, destroy target creature an opponent controls. But of course, we can also take creatures out with Crypt Rats, which has pay X, it deals X damage to each creature and each player, spend only black mana on X. We can also ping creatures though with Needletooth Raptor, which has whenever it's dealt damage, it deals 5 damage to our creature an opponent controls. Or we can take a massive amount of creatures out all at once with Bane of the Living, which has a morph cost of X black, and when it's turned face up, all creatures get -X until end of turn. And then Tetsamok Primal Death takes creatures out in different ways. It has Death Touch, and by paying a black reveal from our hand, and we put a pretty counter on target creature, activate only during our turn. And then when it enters the battlefield, we destroy each creature opponents control with a prey counter on it. Next up though, we've got Feed the Swarm, which is going to destroy target creature or an enchantment an opponent controls, and we lose life equal to that permanent's mana value. Finally though, we can also take things out with Bedevil. You find some prisoners in Rakdos Charm. Bedevil's going to destroy target artifact, creature, or planeswalker. You find some prisoners can destroy an artifact, or we can exile the top 3 cards of the opponent's library, and we can choose one of them, and we can cast that card until the end of our next turn. And Rakdos Charm says choose 1 exile card to target player's graveyard, destroy target artifact, or each creature deals 1 damage to its controller. So yeah, these can be fantastic options for us. And speaking of options, well, we also have some animals that can help make our commanders even stronger with cards like Labyrinth Raptor, Rabbit Battery, and Lizard Blades. Labyrinth Raptor is a 2/2 with Menace that says whenever a creature you control with Menace becomes blocked, defending player sacrifice a creature blocking it. And by paying black-red, we can make creatures we control with Menace get +1 until end of turn. So this can make our commanders even deadlier and harder to block. Next up, there's Rabbit Battery, which is an Equipment Rabbit, and it's got haste, and equipped creature gets +1 and has haste. Whereas Lizard Blades is an Equipment Lizard that has double strike and give equipped creature double strike. Next up though, we've got an Equipment Dog with Kamainu Battle Armor, which is a 2/2 with Menace that gives equipped creature +2/+2 and Menace, and whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, goad each creature that player controls. And then Bronzeplate Boar is going to give equipped creature +3/+2 and trample, whereas Chainflail Centipede, which is an equipment insect, says whenever it or equipped creature attacks, gets +2/+0 until end of turn. Next up though, we actually have some backgrounds that can help our commanders out as well with Agent of the Iron Throne, Guild Artisan, and Popular Entertainer. Agent of the Iron Throne says commander creatures you own have, whenever an artifact or a creature you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life. And then Guild Artisan says commander creatures you own have, whenever this creature attacks a player, if no opponent had more life than that player, you create 2 treasure tokens. And then Popular Entertainer says commander creatures you own have, whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, go target creature that player controls. But of course, we're not quite done with our backgrounds just yet. We also have Agent of the Shadow Thieves, Criminal Past, and Tavern Brawler. Agent of the Shadow Thieves says commander creatures you own have, whenever this creature attacks a player, if no opponent has more life than that player, put a +1 counter on this creature, gains Death Touch and indestructible until end of turn. So this can be a great way to protect our commanders and to grow them through combat. And speaking of growing our commanders in combat, there's Criminal Past, which says commander creatures you own have Menace, and this creature gets +X/+0 or X the number of creature cards in your graveyard. Tavern Brawler can also pump our commanders as well. It says commander creatures you own have, at the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library. This creature gets +X/+0 until end of turn, where X that card's mana value. You may play that card this turn. So by hitting something big, our commanders can hit for a ton. Speaking of which, of course, we're also going to be running Blackblade Reforged, which is a fantastic equipment. It's going to give equipped creature +1/+1 for each land we control. And again, with Kediss spreading around the damage, that can be a lot of damage to all of our opponents. But now that we've talked about every single non-land card in this deck, let's move on to the lands. First up, we've got Command Tower, which can tap for either our colors, and Exotic Orchard, which can tap for either of them most of the time. Moving on, we've got Ash Barrens, which has basic land cycling for 1, and Evolving Gods and Temporary Expanse, which we can both sacrifice to get a basic into play tapped. Up next, there's Mirror Landscape, which can actually help ramp us by getting 2 of our lands into play tapped, and Rakdos Carnarium, which enters the battlefield tapped, and when it enters the battlefield, we bounce a land back to our hand, but it can tap for both of our colors. Moving on, we've got Smoldering Marsh, which can enter the battlefield untapped if we meet its requirement, and it can tap for either of our colors. Shadowblood Ridge, which we can pay 1 and 2 to tap to filter our mana, and Temple of Mouse, which enters the battlefield taps, can have a scry 1, it can tap for either of our colors. And finally, of course, the rest of this deck is rounded out with mountains and swamps. But now that we've talked about every single card in this deck, let's talk about the price. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, this deck is incredibly budget friendly, with every single card in it being less than $1, so the estimated cost of this deck is just $24.42. And actually, you can save even more if you've already got the basic lands for this deck, because that estimated cost actually includes those basic lands at 10 cents a piece. And speaking of potential savings, you might be able to save even more than that by buying this deck on TCG Player and utilizing heavily played and damaged cards, which of course need a home too. Though do keep in mind that this estimated cost does not include the cost of shipping, which might vary depending upon where you live. And with that, the show is coming to a close, so it's my turn here from you. So in the comments below, let me know your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. We also have a ton of brand new t-shirt designs in stock, so make sure you check out those as well. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support.